currently the Director of Office of Personnel Management at the White House. Prior to this, you were at Andreessen Horowitz, and you were the first employee at A16Z.
I'm a Ben and Marc lifer, basically. The two of them had this vision that the venture industry had changed, would change. Turns out 16 and a half, 17 years later, they were pretty much right on spec for that.
Office of Personnel Management.
So you probably never heard of it, which is not surprising. We are basically kind of the talent and the HR policy organization for the civilian population in government. It is the biggest scale HR job, I guess is the way to think about it, yeah.
Okay, Scott Kupor, welcome to Be the Builders.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're currently the Director of Office of Personnel Management.
Yes.
At the White House.
Do you know what that is?
We'll get deeper into what that is, but my audience probably knows you for a very different reason, which is that prior to this, you were at Andreessen Horowitz for about 16 years.
Yep. And
you were the first employee at A16Z.
That's correct.
And before that, you worked at LoudCloud for 10 years?
I did.
So
I'm a Ben and Marc lifer, basically.
Yeah, so basically
25 years.
25 years you've worked with Marc and Ben before.
A glutton for punishment is maybe the best way to describe it.
So tell me more about, I would love to learn more about the origin story of Andreessen and how it's built up to the firm it is today.
Yeah, so the history is it starts a little bit before, which is we were all at the time, it was called Opsware. It started as LoudCloud and it became Opsware. We sold Opsware in 2007 to Hewlett-Packard. And a bunch of us had some, indentured servitude obligations to Hewlett-Packard that we had to stick around for. Yeah. And then, but what happened was, both for Marc and Ben, they had started doing angel investing on their own, probably going back to like 2005 or something. And they did a bunch of stuff. And about, 2008, they kind of said, hey, this is interesting stuff, but we think we could have a much bigger impact on the ecosystem if we raised a fund instead of just, writing $50,000, $100,000 checks as individual angel investors. So they were kind enough to reach out to me in the summer of 2008, and they said, hey, we're thinking about this thing, about starting a fund. And I was like, okay, that sounds interesting, but you got to remember, this is like summer of 2008, so Bear Stearns had gone like bankrupt in like March of 2008. We hadn't yet quite gotten to the depths of the financial crisis. In September, of course, Lehman will basically end up going out of business. And so I was like, guys, like this probably isn't the best time in the world to actually start a new fund. And they're like, oh, don't worry about it. Remember, in the history, the reason why they said don't worry about it is because we had taken LoudCloud public in literally, kind of 2001. There was us and like one other company. Storage Networks actually was the name of the company that went public. So they're like, look, these things are fine. It'll all change. So anyways, that was kind of how it started. I hemmed and hawed longer than I should have. Marc and Ben like to joke that, had I agreed the first time they asked me, it would have been, Horowitz, Andreessen, Kupor, or some version of that. I have no idea if that's all revisionist history or not, but I squandered my opportunity to truly be a founder because, I was too scared to basically jump ship in the middle of the global financial crisis. But I did start, kind of when we, closed the first fund, which was kind of beginning of 2009. So look, the basic origin story was this. Look, the two of them had this vision that the venture industry had changed, would change, that obviously with cloud computing, with kind of, the opportunities for people to be able to not have to use all their venture money to go buy servers and buy networking equipment, all this stuff, but you could rent this, that it would just dramatically change the size and the scope and the opportunity for venture. And, turns out 16 and a half, 17 years later, they were pretty much right on spec for that.
It also, I think part of the origin story is also that Michael Ovitz joined the board, right? And from day one, I think there was this sort of vision for it to be a part talent agency, which ties into sort of what you're doing now.
Exactly, yeah.
Part talent agency, part media company, and then just look at everything completely differently.
Yeah, I think that's right. So some of your audience may not know Michael Ovitz from his like super amazing glory days, but he starts what becomes CAA in 1975, and at the time, his big innovation in the industry, which is a lot of, as you're right, a lot of what inspired Marc and Ben was this idea that in the old, Hollywood talent agency business, it kind of looked like the old venture capital business, which is you had like, you were a GP in the VC world, or you were a talent agent in the agency world, and you kind of ran your own book of business. You had your clients, you introduced them to opportunities in TV and newspaper or, books or all kinds of other stuff. But it was kind of very much a like one person show, essentially. Like, even though you were part of a firm, you really didn't have a concept of being part of a kind of consolidated effort. And what he brought to CAA was, look, like, we're going to basically break that model, and instead of having like the agent do everything, the agent is going to principally be the relationship management, kind of arm of the organization, and then we're going to build out expertise in all these other areas. So we're going to have somebody who just only does like television contracts, and somebody who does radio, and somebody who does movies, so that when you come in as a talent, in 1990, when by then they had like 90% market share in the business, they would all sit around a table, and the GP equivalent, the talent advisor, would say, "Great, let me introduce you to my new client here." And you would see all the people around the table who'd say, "Great, like, I'm the TV guy, I'm going to show you what to do." And so the theory was to essentially decompose the job and then build out like, expertise in different areas. And that was the basic kind of model that we did at Andreessen Horowitz. So same thing, which is, look, the GP obviously ultimately is the relationship manager and obviously the board member who kind of works with the individual, but the GP doesn't have to know every single buyer at every tech company to introduce the company to. They don't need to know every CFO in the Valley to bring them into their companies. The theory was build out these areas of specialized expertise so that when we present to the entrepreneur, we present as a unified firm. And the canonical VC model was, we basically said we were trying to institutionalize John Doerr, again, for this, but for your some of your listeners, John Doerr was like the canonical GP at Kleiner Perkins, who basically, from my perspective, made Kleiner Perkins. And John was the everyman, basically. So John knew, when you met with John, he'd be like, "Great, like, I know all these people in politics. I know all these people," and he would be the connector. Yeah. And so our theory of the firm was, could we institutionalize that? And so there wasn't a single thread of John Doerr, but there was a firm that you could interact with that basically could bring to bear all those relationships.
So the GP was this unicorn connector in a way that across industries has these deep relationships and sort of goes horizontally, right? But that's like it's a single point of failure as well, because they can only take on so many new relationships.
Well, the GP, look, the problem, the fundamental constraint in the venture business, as you know, look, is, yes, the GP job is fundamentally limited by like how many board seats can you do. Now, there is a perennial argument, which is how many can you do. So there's supposedly a guy at NEA who has like 40 boards. I won't name him, but who appears to be breaking the mold. But yeah, so like, we couldn't solve that problem. But what we could do is, look, if a typical GP could only do 8 boards because they also had to spend time, meeting the buyers at, Home Depot and places like that. Instead, we could say, look, you don't need to know the buyers at Home Depot. We'll staff an organization to be able to do that. And so, number one, we could create greater scalability for the general partner. And so I think if you look at our partners, some of them have like a lot of, like even more, but let's call it, maybe you can do 12 to 15 boards instead of 8 or 10 because like we've given you scale on your time. But yeah, look, that's the fundamental limiter. The other fundamental limiter, at least I think, and this is where I think Marc and Ben have brilliantly solved this problem, is at some point in time, these partnerships get so big that it's very hard to make decisions because you get too many people sitting around a table arguing about stuff where, some people actually truly have all the domain expertise and others don't. And not because they're bad people. It's just, look, if I'm Martin Casado and all I do is AI infrastructure all day long, of course he knows like 1,000 times more about that than I do, or even someone like Ben does, right? And so the other kind of, I think, innovation that these guys did, in addition to the Michael Ovitz innovation, was figure out how to scale a venture capital firm. And like, again, you can kind of modularly scale at least the theoretical board capacity of a GP, but even that runs out. The real question is, can you create an organizational structure, which they did, where you basically subdivide into subject matter expertise at funds so that, we've got a bunch of different funds. Most of them have somewhere between 3 and maybe 6 general partners. And recognize that, look, as brilliant as Chris Dixon is in crypto, he doesn't need to sit in like the bio and health pitches basically and, try to add value to that because like, it's just not his area of expertise. So that's, I think, the other like innovation that I think people forget about is just this idea of kind of scale within a venture firm that enables you to create a well-functioning like big firm like A16Z, as opposed to like the centralization model, which I think is how most people have tried to kind of build scale. And in our view, like centralization just doesn't work in this industry because the domains are just too deep.
Within the structure, what parts do you centralize? Do you centralize marketing, recruiting, these GTM go-to-market, relationships, corp dev sort of relationships, fundraising? Do you like try to centralize that, or? Yeah,
so I would think about it as like there's two kind of vectors of centralization. So one is, look, the thing we don't want to centralize is exactly where we started, which is, look, you don't want to centralize decision making. Yeah. You want that pushed down as far down the organization as possible to the subject matter experts. Then there's like, okay, we started with go-to-market as a centralized organization, but over time, as we added bio or crypto or stuff like that, we're like, wait a second, what a entrepreneur needs in go-to-market in crypto is different than what a bio person needs. And so over time, we decentralized those. So today there is a go-to-market team that lives in the crypto fund with Chris Dixon, and there is a bio go-to-market team. So we kind of started to disaggregate things that initially were kind of centralized. So talent, all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Then there's the stuff that you truly can truly centralize, which is, okay, yes, investor relations. At the end of the day, yes, investors want to deal with us as a firm. And of course, we have people who work on the bio fund and other stuff like that. But that makes sense to centralize it because at the end of the day, you're calling on the same types of people. Core legal,
accounting,
finance, right? Stuff like that. And then I would think about it as again, things that are compliance and or risk related functions where you don't want one organization to do something that then kind of, makes the whole firm, be brought up in front of some charges for doing something stupid, right? So things of that sort make sense. Now, there's always domain, again, you can do this in different ways, right? You could have it centrally and you could have it dotted line reporting into the agents, into the different organizations. But at the end of the day, I would think about it as IR, compliance, risk type things and accounting. You can centralize those. Everything else over time really becomes domain specific.
I think another one of the things I don't know if Andreessen was the first to this was support with recruiting.
Yeah.
Right. What I was talking to Sunil Dhaliwal, who's at Amplify, about this because they also have a recruiting function, and that just compounds as such an incredible moat over time because building these relationships, you are almost the first call when instead of joining, they're thinking of starting.
Yes.
Right. So. It's a hard function to manage though, right? I guess if you're starting out 1 fund in, 2 funds in, how do you make sense of having dedicated recruiters part of a venture capital firm?
Well, look, all these things are hard to manage. And this is, again, I think the reason why Marc and Ben have made it successful was a couple things. Number one was, look, you're absolutely right, which is, you need money to do all these things. And look, we've had the benefit over time at A16Z of being able to have enough of a management fee stream where you can basically do, you can afford to do these things. Now, you also have to get general partners who buy into this, right? Because at the end of the day, and again, I always say this, the general partners, no one should feel sorry for the GPs at A16Z, right? Their kids all, have shoes to wear to school and, nobody's missing meals. But at the end of the day, if you just took the management fee money that Andreessen Horowitz has, you could pay it all out to the general partners and obviously they would, be even better off than they are today, right?
Yeah.
But so part of it is, you have to have people who kind of select into the idea that the value of the firm is bigger than the individual value of what I might derive from compensation on the salary side. And hopefully I make it up because the carry that I earn is that much more valuable and the leverage on my time and all those other stuff. So I think that's part of it. The other thing I think that we did a really good job on the talent side is you can't make it transactional and you have to basically be there. You have to basically be a partner to the talent, right? I know that sounds kind of weird, but it's not good if we meet some great CFO and then we're like, oh man, this person's great. We got to put him into this really crappy company that's in trouble and not tell him the truth and stuff like that. The whole idea was, and Jeff Stump's the guy who set this group up for us, was we got to have a relationship with the talent and we want to basically help them think about how can we help them advance their career. Yeah. And then if you do that, you establish that trust, then yes, maybe there is a troubled company where you're hey, this is a troubled company. Yeah. We need your help here, but hopefully help us fix this. Yeah. And then we're going to put you in.
Consensually, happily do it.
Exactly. Right. and then we'll introduce you to Ali at Databricks, right? Or something like that. Right. So, but you can't do that unless you kind of have built it that way. I think, again, where these things go wrong sometimes is they become too transactional and you lose the value of the relationship over time. And again, I think the team has done a really good job of perfecting that.
That is an incredible long-term view on, I guess venture is a network job, but this is an incredibly long-term view on relationships.
Yes.
Do you think?
Well, that is if you've ever been to our offices or if you've read our stuff, you will see that is a centralized cultural tenet of the firm, which is we take a long-term view of relationships. We literally say it that way.
Tell you an interesting story. I recorded with David Olovich about 2 weeks ago, and we were in the New York offices, and Rhythm was flying in very last minute with cameras and stuff, and I wasn't sure if all cameras and video equipment would get there and stuff. And he gets in there, my videographer, he gets in there, and there's an A16Z videography team with all their equipment waiting there, all set. They're prepared in case
we put Rhythm out of a job.
In case my team doesn't show up, in case nobody else shows up, the team is ready to go.
Yeah,
right. And he gets in there, he's like, cameras, lights are already here. Why did we bring so much stuff? And
that's awesome.
And then I texted the team. I was like, I texted Morgan. I was like, oh, this was awesome. Or emailed her. Thank you so much. Yeah. It's good to know that, next time I don't need to bring all this stuff. And
would have been nice to know that.
It would have been nice to know that.
Taking it all on a plane.
She emailed me. We only do first class business.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think is part of the culture.
Yeah.
Like small.
Yeah, they're related. Yeah. The first class business piece, as you probably know, comes from the original JP Morgan, right? So that was actually the moniker of the original like JP Morgan was like, we only do first class business in a first class way.
I did not know that actually.
Yeah, so that's where that comes from, and and again, that was something that Marc and Ben adopted. The long-term relationships piece is, I mean, I think you could argue, right, that's an offshoot of that, right, which is that's a part of doing first-class business, but that is also a separate foundational, like, cultural value for the firm, which is, and I think you're right, which is, look, it's weird to even say that in the venture world because, of course, venture is a long-term relationship business. I mean, obviously, look, we're with these companies for 10, 15, sometimes 20 years, right? Who knows, right? I mean, SpaceX, just went public a couple weeks ago. I'm pretty sure it was a private company for almost 20 years.
25 years.
Yeah, 25 years. So it's not like these are not short-term relationships, but what it really meant, obviously, and again, I think this is where hopefully you see it, is it means you can't be transactional in any of these things. And it's got to be true with entrepreneurs. It's also true with LPs. Look, I think, I had the pleasure of like doing, a ton of our LP stuff for, a huge amount of time before we brought in Jen Ka, who now runs it like amazingly well. But I think if you talk to our LPs too, like they're like, wow, you guys do take a very long-term view of this stuff. And look, our view, which, I know Ben and Marc echo all the time, is like, you have to build long-term, like the only way to make sense of these things is you got to recognize that you're building goodwill over time. And look, there are times where you're gonna have to draw on that goodwill because you have a bad fund or you have a bad economic cycle or something like that. But if you take a long-term view of that, I think you find that, you have a lot of forgiveness when things like that come up that maybe everyone, isn't excited about.
Do you do these? So you talked about these individual practices evolving within the firm, right? Whether that's crypto or whether that's American Dynamism or bio and health. Was it more natural that it naturally just like the GPs that were there at the time were going deeper in specific verticals, and there was this opportunity that maybe Chris Dixon takes up starts A16Z crypto and that spins out, or Andrew Chen like builds up
gaming and
speedrun, that practice, right? Or David Olovich, who was, I think he was there before, and then
he was there before, and then he brought on Catherine, and then officially
exactly in that practice.
Yeah. So the answer is yes. It was organic was the basic answer, right? Was like there was no tops down meeting where like like what should we do next, right? But it was, and again, this is where again I give Ben and Marc an enormous amount of credit is. They give the GPs the freedom to go figure that stuff out, right? So again,
that is very unique.
It is very unique, right? And this is again like, look, there's some things like from a governance perspective that are different in the firm, which is again, you've probably heard this, but like, at the end of the day, look, Marc and Ben own the management company, which de facto means at the end of the day, look, they're
like the CEO, president.
Yeah, like we all serve at their pleasure. It's just some way to describe it. But I think also, but again, and we've been transparent on that. Like, so no GP comes in like thinking that they basically aren't in that situation. Obviously, how you handle economics is totally different, and they've been very, very generous in terms of setting up the economics in a different way. But what I think that governance structure enables us to do these kinds of things, right? Because then what happens is Chris Dixon comes to us and says, "Hey, like, there's this great opportunity in crypto," and Ben's like, "Great, like." If you think it's there and you're the subject matter expert and you're going to go like put your entire career online for this thing, like, yeah, let's go do it. Now, again, it's, obviously Marc and Ben ask a lot of questions because they're, smart guys. And so if someone came and said, there's a great opportunity for us to do like Beanie Babies or something, my guess is probably they'd throw them out on the floor. But it's a really, really unique structure in that way. And these things happen organically. Yes, American Dynamism. And by the way, some things don't happen. So I'll just give you an example. Like we've had a bunch of people who are like, we should be in the private equity buyout world, right? And this comes up, by the way, every other year.
It just came up over lunch.
Is that right? Okay, yeah. And they're like, we can make a ton of money. And Marc and Ben are like, yeah, we can make a ton of money probably, but like, it's just not, that's not brand consistent. That's not who we are. We are technological optimists. Like we believe in the power of entrepreneurship, the power of like the CEO running the company. We can't have a business where we are like simultaneously saying that on one end, on the other end, we are like, laying off 30% of the people because we think like we have to make a better EBITDA, number for next quarter or something, right? I'm being a little bit facetious in terms of that one, but so there's stuff like that. Like we looked at credit for a long time, and maybe that's something that we will do at some point in time, but it wasn't right at the time. I spent a bunch of time. Marc asked me to look at, okay, should we have a public investing fund, like in the like 2019, like right before COVID, we spent a bunch of time. In fact, we were interviewing people for that. And so it's, I say that not to say that like, they have not like, basically said like, it's carte blanche, do whatever you want. Like everything has to fit into the overall strategy. But this idea that people can come up organically, like David Ulrich did with American Dynamism, or obviously, what Andrew did with gaming, or what's happened on the bio side. Like that has all been like driven organically by partners who are like, yes, like this is the right thing. And then, convince Marc and Ben the opportunities there. And then the theory is then great. Okay. Like let's build it up over time. Right. So just because it's a great idea, like as you've seen, like with Speedrun, okay, like let's not go raise $1 billion fund the first time, even though, arguably maybe you could do that if you just given the LP relationships. Let's like prove it out. Let's make it work. And then, like grow organically, in time.
Right. So it's actually fun to learn about all the other ideas that it didn't actually play out.
Yeah.
And there are like firms of similar size have actually opted into the PE buyout strategy, the roll-up strategy. Some that come to mind are Thrive and GC. Is part of it just differentiation? Is it, just different insights which give you access to, and relationships which give you access to different opportunities? And at some point, are you compelled to take it on?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously, I don't look. I know Josh well, and I have an enormous respect for him. And GC obviously is an incredibly great firm. So, look, I don't pretend to know exactly what their motivation were in those things. But look, I can understand how they got to those decisions because if you look at like Josh, he's like, look, we have the relationships, we understand these things, and oh, by the way, like there are natural synergies I think between those. So, like, I certainly don't like think it's a crazy idea.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these things come down to, maybe just idiosyncrasies of like, what do you want? Where do you want to spend your time? And again, at least for right now, and Marc and Ben, Ben has always taught me like consistency is never an objective. Getting it right is the objective. So look, he may wake up tomorrow and say, okay, yes, I've said we'll never do buyout, but now we're doing buyout. So like he reserves the right to do that. He is the leader of the firm. Yeah. But I just think it's more like if you ask them like, what do you want to do and where do you want to spend your time every day? I think their view is, look, I'd much rather spend my time with some really interesting entrepreneur who's doing something really cool and like has, whatever, a 1% chance of succeeding. But if it succeeds, it changes the world. Like, I just think that's part of like how who they are as people.
Yeah.
Look, that may change. And look, if they were, if you had a view that you wanted to be a publicly traded venture capital firm, for example, you would do those other things because at the end of the day, as you probably know, like the public market values like management fee streams more than it does like carry fee streams, right? And so certainty of fee stream becomes more important. So, and I don't know whether those are aspirations that those individuals have, but I would say like, I can tell you that is not an aspiration that Marc and Ben have, having managed a public company in the .com.
That's actually a fair point,
Yeah, they're like, look, like the last thing we ever want to do is run another public company.
And they went through it twice, with Netscape and then...
Exactly, right. Netscape was a real interesting challenge. Of course, we went through it with LoudCloud and Opsware. And so, look, again, now maybe, you should
one day you wake up and
you should hear from Ben and Marc on this, not me, because they may say everything Scott said is totally BS and like, don't believe anything he says. But like, at least based on what I understand of them, that's not an objective for how they think about the business.
Well, speaking of spending, thinking about where to spend your time, a lot of my audience are not thinking about spending, well, maybe some of them who have government relations, who think about policy or whose business depends on policy are thinking about DC.
Yeah.
But most of them are thinking about it from a business perspective.
Yes.
A lot of them are not thinking about working in DC.
Yes.
So how did that come about?
Many of us did not think about working in DC.
What is the origin story of that?
Yeah, so it's really a couple things. I mean, first of all, the like precursor to it was just having been incredibly lucky in my life and being in a situation where like I had the, kind of financial flexibility and, the blessing of Marc and Ben to say, okay, look, like if there's something else that like you think is your highest calling, like by all means, go do that. So truth be told, like I always had this, it was always on my bucket list to do something in DC. I was literally a public policy major at Stanford. In fact, actually Kevin Warsh, who is speaking right now, probably as we're recording, doing his first press conference as the Fed governor, we were in the same major together at Stanford. So we've known each other for a very long time. And I spent a summer, as an intern, literally like getting coffee for people and, probably making photocopies at the time in DC. So, but I always thought I always had an interest generally in policy stuff. And I kind of put that on the back burner for literally 35 years.
I did not know that. That's interesting.
So there's in theory some through line here, even though it's, this might just be post revisionist history, but there is some,
it's okay. We get to write our own. So
exactly right. But a lot of it was, look, as you know, as a firm, we became more involved in policy. Yep. Particularly starting with when Chris Dixon started the crypto fund, right? Because we recognized obviously the intersection between policy and regulation and all this other stuff. And when we first started the fund, we didn't have like this great team that we have today in DC. So I was the person who I raised my hand. I'm like, okay, sure, I'll go testify in front of the Senate or go to the SEC and argue why crypto is, should not be a security and all this other stuff. And so I kind of scratched my itch a little bit that way. I was the president of the chairman of the National Venture Capital Association for a year, which is kind of the trade group for the organization. So I kind of had some, at least, inkling of this stuff. Later on, of course, we actually brought real people in who knew what they were doing. So we now have, a 20+ person team in DC who actually understand how to, kind of do these things. So that was kind of there. And then what happened was, look, as we got involved in, more in politics, and in particular when Marc and Ben decided ultimately that they would, give money to and endorse Trump, in the last election, there was a general call. And so Marc was involved, just for that relationship. There was a general call to people like Marc and obviously David Sachs and others, which is, hey, look, if there are people in the tech industry who are interested in serving the country, the president was at least open to, having those types of individuals in addition to obviously the more traditional political players, of course, who, have often been in it. So that's how I got involved. So Marc called me up and so I sent an email. The very true story is I sent an email to Marc in June of 24, actually to Marc and Ben. And I was like, hey, if this works out, and you guys are comfortable with it, I might want to put my hat in, the ring to see if this works out. And so they're like, yeah, okay, whatever. And I kind of forgot about that email. Yeah. And then Marc comes back to me in September. He's like, okay, I assume you were serious. I've just introduced you to a guy named Howard Lutnick, who of course now is the Commerce Secretary. Howard at the time was running the transition team. And he's like, you need to go to New York and see him if you are serious about this. So I got on a plane and went to Howard, see Howard. And if you've ever met Howard, you know him. He's one of the most gregarious guys. And he's like, yeah, this is great. He had this I don't even know how big it was. He had this massive org chart on his desk.
Very charismatic. I briefly, met him or saw him at the conference.
Yeah, super charismatic. And he's like, this is what you should do. And at the time, it actually was not OPM. So he wanted me to go. He's like, you should go work for a guy named Russ Vogt, who's now the head of OMB, the Office of Management Budget. Right. He's like, that would be a perfect fit for you. And so anyways, that's how I got into the process. The process is a very long and tortuous process where you end up actually not in Mar-a-Lago, but in a terrible office building in West Palm Beach, or I don't even know where it is, but somewhere like that where, and I'll never forget because the first time I went out there, it was last minute. They're like, oh, by the way, we're, interviewing for people, can you be here tomorrow? And so I tried to get a hotel and I ended up getting one of these, I don't even know what you call them, one of these Westin family hotels something where it turns out it's every room is in theory a suite. But
how many people were there?
So I was the only one who was dumb enough to stay at this hotel, but I stayed at the hotel and it's literally a combination of a bunch of kids running around having in the pool. And then at the same time, and then I got up the next morning. I remember I got up early to go to the gym and there was 50, 75-year-old women doing water yoga or something in the pool. And I was like, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? And it was nowhere near Mar-a-Lago or anything like that. It was
Were you reevaluating your choices?
Exactly. It was some really, really dumpy place in the middle of nowhere. So anyways, yeah. So there were a bunch of people. The nice thing about it was once I got there were a lot of people in the tech community who were actually part of the interview process. So I got to, I actually interviewed with, there was kind of, there was a bunch of obviously more Republican political people, but then there was a bunch of people in the general, Elon orbit, who were interviewing for that. So it was at least more comforting once I finally showed up. I'm like, okay, I actually know some of these people and this is not completely crazy.
We have friends there. Everybody's going through the same thing.
Yeah. But it was fun. My favorite story, that was my very first interview was with actually Peter Navarro, who is, now he's I don't know what his official title is, but he's kind of, been a long time Republican. And he had just I think he had gone to jail or something for a period of time for some Trump 45 related thing. And with Katie Miller, who's Stephen Miller's wife, who again, also was part of the administration. And the first thing that Peter says to me is he's like, oh, you're another one of these Silicon Valley guys. He's like, how many Chinese nationals work at your company? And I said, look, I don't, at your companies in your portfolio, I was like, look, I don't know the answer, but I'm sure it's greater than zero. Yeah. And he's a big, tariff guy, as you know, and everything. Yeah. And he's like, I don't understand how you do that. How can you guys possibly do this? This is crazy. You have spies in your companies and stuff. And I was like, look, this is not going well. Yeah. This is not a great way to start an interview. Luckily, I managed to recover from that and, kind of ultimately, obviously got the job. But anyways, it was a pretty interesting process.
Right. We've actually talked. Do you know Leland Miller?
The name is familiar, but
he's a commissioner at the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission.
Okay,
they're formed by Speaker Mike Johnson, and
okay, got it. Okay.
So we talked about this actually, and the number is non-zero.
It's definitely non-zero.
Stanford Review published a report that 15% of their own students are probably spies, and we were like, oh, so and then but you can't really do anything about it. It's like what Leland actually concluded is like, yes, we know, we're aware. When you stack rank the priorities and the issues we have, like, how do you solve it?
Yeah,
it's a complicated issue.
I think that's right. Look, it's no question it's complicated. Look, yes, in the perfect world you would not have spies in your company, right? That would probably be the desired end state, right? But look, at the end of the day, look, as you well know, like, every startup is a fight against the clock and against time and for talent, and so yes, like you might have a bad apple here and there, but look, I would venture to say that the vast majority of engineers and people at these companies are, very upstanding, well-meaning people who, want to help you achieve your goals. And so, look, I mean,
and the people at the top too, well-meaning, well-intentioned people.
I think that's right.
Do the right thing.
Look, I don't know what the right answer is, but the answer probably will always be non-zero to that question is my guess, but I don't know, maybe there's
and that's probably not just true for Chinese nationals, probably true for other nationalities as well.
And look, my personal view is, look, the technology industry, as we know, has been a tremendous beneficiary, obviously, of, all kinds of, immigration of very, very high skilled labor. And so, like, you can, in theory, imagine a world where maybe that didn't happen, but it's really, I think it's hard. And this data is all out there, as you know it, right? Like 50% of the founders of companies in Silicon Valley, are first generation, right? There's no question, like, the positive impact it's had. And yes, I'm sure there are
more
bad
than
apples here and
half
there.
The unicorn founders are immigrants or first-gen immigrants. So like you rightly pointed out, I mean, the largest IPO was by Elon Musk.
Yes,
also
technically Elon Musk is not a native-born. So look,
so that is like, it gets messier if you start thinking about it that way.
Selfishly, look, as an American, look, I want I want the benefits of technological innovation to accrue to, American people and stuff like that. And so, look, if that means that we can be kind of a place where, like, these super smart people come to America because they believe they can achieve their goals in entrepreneurship and technology innovation, I still think that's probably a good outcome.
Well, now fast forward, you do get the job.
Yes, now I have the job. Yes,
and now you do have to spend time all the way on the other coast. You're in DC and Office of Personnel Management. Tell me more about.
OPM is
I had not
what we call it. Yes. I had to explain it to my wife as well. So the basic way I would think about Office of Personnel Management is we are basically kind of the talent and the HR policy organization for the civilian population in government. So what does that mean? Okay, so there's about 2 million roughly civilian employees today in the federal government, and then of course there's, I think, like 4 million like uniformed military and stuff like that every day, but 2 million civilians. So our jobs are very simple, which is, can we make sure we get the right talent in the organization? 2 is, do we make sure we have, like, the right actual policy? So I'll just give you crazy examples, like, which you probably know about. Like, everybody today in the federal government gets ranked at the top of their class. Everybody gets an A, right? So people get ranked 1 through 5. Literally, like, 99.7% of the people get a 3, 4, or 5, which means, like, and 70% of the people get a 4 or 5, which means they are exceeding expectations. And, and 0.3% are below expectations. So in a population of 2 million, you might imagine that there was probably a more, normal distribution of talent as opposed to, like, everyone knocks the cover off the ball. And so, like, one of the things we are doing is we're saying, like, that doesn't make sense to us. We want a high performance culture. We are putting a limit on the number of 4s and 5s. You can only have 30% of your population there, by the way. And for that population, you need to disproportionately give them more bonus money. You need to promote them faster, right? So an environment where people like you or your listeners might want to come into, which is, hey, it's not a place where just how long you've been in the seat matters, but actual performance matters. And we're going to be willing to accept that not all people, unfortunately, perform equally in a company. So those are kinds of things that we would do. And then our third big area, of course, is just, how do we modernize the structure from a technology perspective in government? How do we create efficiency, right? A lot of the initial DOGE-related activity was done out of the Office of Personnel Management. When Elon and Steve Davis and those guys were there, a lot of them were sitting at OPM because it's one of the few organizations that's kind of a cross-government organization. So obviously, I don't have 2 million people who report to me, but we have overall like policy-making authority for those 2 million individuals.
That is a hell of a lot of work. That is like it taking on HR for the largest sort of company in the world.
I think, the only closest would be Walmart, right? Which has close to 2 million people. But like there's no question. Yeah, it is the biggest scale HR job, I guess is the way to think about it. Yeah.
So how are you, I've obviously, seen the Tech Force initiatives that have come out and some of the talent exchange stuff you've been thinking about to get, I guess, some of the work overlaps with Doge, which was how do you get more high agency, talent, ambitious talent, excited about working for the government. But there are other parts that you mentioned that are complicated in transforming the existing system.
Yes.
Maybe we can talk about the latter first and go back to that. How do you, one of the questions I wanted to ask was like, maybe what would you count as a win at the end of your term? And is there a time we could see the equivalent of a PayPal mafia coming out of the government because of the nature of the complexity of the problems they go on to solve?
Yeah, and in fact, actually, on that part, I think you're already seeing some of that, right? In fact, I know for a fact that there are a number of Doge engineers, right, who have now spun out. I think actually A16Z may have even invested in one of them. I don't even know. But so we're already seeing that, which is, and look, time will tell, obviously, whether they're successful or not. But I think we will see more of that. So look, on that side, here's the big things we're trying to do. So the wins to me would be, number one is, this is the most important thing, is we have got to change, and I think we're doing a good job. We have got to change the culture of risk-taking and innovation in government. So just to take a step back, the entire culture of government is compliance, regulation, fear of some congressional committee calling you in front of them and saying, like, you're an idiot, you're not doing the right things. And so as a result, not surprisingly, like, we take literally zero risk, which also means, therefore, of course, we have no innovation, right? And so it's not surprising. Like, this is not, and by the way, this is not an indictment of the people there. Like, this is a systems problem, right? Which is like the incentive structure is totally screwed up, is the short answer. So to me, like, the huge thing we're trying to do is to say, look, like, we're not going to go do Silicon Valley venture capital risk because, like, for example, if we're a Department of War, like, people could actually die if we do something wrong. Like, we don't want to do that. But the vast majority of us are not in the business of life or death in government, right? Most of us are in the business of, like, do you get your Social Security check, or do does the IRS file your taxes on time? Like, okay, like, we don't have to necessarily, like, we can afford to take some risk. But so what I'm trying to introduce is, culturally and from a incentives perspective, we've got to be willing to say, there are some things for which getting 100% on the test is not always the right answer. We've got to take some modicum of risk balanced against upside, right? This is where I think this is the lesson to me from Silicon Valley that I do think is right, which is Silicon Valley thinks about upside risk relative to downside opportunity relative to downside risk, and they have a different risk tolerance, which is fine. So, like, we can dial down the risk tolerance, but that same mental model has to make sense. So that's a huge thing of what we have to do, because if we do that, we will take on big projects, we will modernize. So we just announced the other day, like, we're doing a big HRIT consolidation project. So literally, there are 119 different HRIT systems across government.
I heard.
Right? None of them talk to one another. We babysit these systems. We spend $2 billion a year on it. Like, we just literally awarded a contract to Oracle where, once fully deployed, like, that $2 billion is going to be like $40 million, right? And like, yes, like, this thing is super risky, and it's got my name all over it. And, as you can imagine, right, there's all kinds of parade of horribles that can happen on this. But, like, in my view, like, we understand the risks. We know the benefit, we know the upside. And so, like, these are things we should do. Like, it has massive benefit to the American taxpayer to do these things. Right. In a normal environment, we would not do that. Like, it's not like I just discovered that we had 119 systems. Like, every single person in government knows this. Right. None of these problems are new. It's just that the willingness of people to actually take risks to get solutions done has been non-existent. So there's stuff like that. The other thing, we do, I'll just give you one more example, is, like, we run retirement services, right? And again, you've probably heard these stories. Joe Jebby has talked about it. But, like, we literally have a paper-based process in an underground mine in Boyers, Pennsylvania, right?
I've heard about it.
So, like, again, like, not a new problem, right? Literally for 50 years, actually 19, it's literally, I think is it 60 years? I think it's 1965. Yeah, so it would be 60 years. This mine has been around, and we've been doing this. And everybody knows, like, it's a problem. It's stupid. Like, we literally mail things by paper. But, like, no one is willing to take that on, because the last thing you want to do is, if you F it up, basically, then, like, okay, you get hauled in front of Congress, or the GAO says you're a bad person, or your inspector general says you're a bad person. And so, like, we're just like, look, we're not going to live with this way anymore. Like, we're going to change it. And so, like, I've got to be willing to take that risk, which I'm perfectly happy to do. And also, I have to give permission to my team to say, okay, look, like, we're going to screw some things up. I'm certain. Like, we're not going to get 100% right, but, like, the benefit of upside of getting this done is just so great. We got to do it, right? And so it's stuff like that. So that to me is a huge like cultural change, right? Some of it is like getting the right talent there to do this stuff, but a bigger part is like changing culture of what I'm calling like permissioned innovation, right? So, we always talk about in the Valley, like permissionless innovation, right? And obviously that's the huge promise of, if you talk to guys like, Chris Dixon on crypto, right? This idea of permissionless innovation, like we can't, government won't allow permissionless innovation, but we can have permissioned innovation, which is like, do we have a process to talk about the downside risks? Do we understand the upside risks? And are we all say like, it's worth it to jump off this cliff together because like we know if we get to nirvana, like, the world is a hell of a lot better place.
It sounds like you're at least like creating these spark plug moments where the conversation is being had.
Yes.
Right. That's like, we're open to ideas.
Yes.
Right. It's not that we're by default going to take the less risky path. We're at least going to talk about it. Right.
Yeah. So, and look, maybe sometimes we decide it's not worth doing. And that's still, I'm fine with that. The problem is the conversation has never happened before.
Right.
There's been this, and it's funny, you talk to people and you're like, well, why do we do it this way? Well, there's some the first answer you always get is it's statutory, right? Which means, in theory, Congress told you had to do this. But like, that's almost never true, basically, because like, as you know, the way Congress writes laws, they don't write laws dictating actually what has to happen. They have these very broad things, and it's up to the agencies to do it. What
a lot
really
of it is open to interpretation, I'm
guessing. It's always open to interpretation.
Look,
the reality is we do things because that's the way we've always done them.
Yeah.
And because the incentive structure that we've created has basically handicapped all these federal employees to the point where it's like, why would I even bother to try to do something different? Because like, that's just not the way it works around here. And so again, like to me, what's exciting about this, and I do see this when I talk to, our employees and others, is like, we're actually, we're in a positive way enabling the employees to actually do things that they would have liked to be doing over time, but they've just been completely prevented from doing so. And like, that's exciting and energizing to people, right? Like, and we should do more of that. But you have to be willing to say, okay, like, yes, it's possible that these things will fail. And it's possible, like, I'm going to, I'll be on the front page of the Washington Post and New York Times, and they'll be like, look, like, stupid OPM director does this dumb thing. And I was like, okay, like, I get that, but like, that's like worth that's worth that risk, I think.
Well, I would imagine across 25 years, both, seeing A16Z scale to probably one of the largest venture firms, in the industry, and also seeing Opsware or Loud Cloud scale, a thing or two about culture.
Yes. Well, and from having, worked for Ben forever, who, is, as you know, like one of the greatest, like,
Hard Thing About Hard Things, one of the best books on culture.
Yeah.
What You Do Is Who You Are.
What You Do Is Who You Are. Yeah, sure.
Both great books on culture. But this is a completely different challenge, right?
It is, yeah.
Functionally, how do you you mentioned there is some willingness within organizations. So how do you find and detect these flag bearers of new sort of this new culture, or how do you is it top down? How do you where do you even start? Like, can you give an example of like whatever you can share publicly of what organizations you started with? And
so I think it's a couple. I think it's a couple things. And again, this will all sound like motherhood apple pie, but like I actually think it's like not that complicated. At least the execution is complicated, but the structure is not. So first of all, it has to start with me or whoever the leader is exactly saying this 8 million times until like I literally want to throw up, because like I've said it a million times, because as you know, look, people don't hear it the first 100 times, or they got other things going on, right? And that's okay. And like that's again something Ben always taught me, learning from him about how to be a CEO. Is like, look, like if you literally aren't just absolutely exhausted from saying it a million times, like you still haven't said enough. So number one, it's just like you have to be very clear about what it is, and then you have to have an incentive structure and a set of cultural precepts that actually support that activity, right? So again, these are hokey when you look at these things on paper, but like one of our like cultural objectives is like ask why, basically, at OPM, right? Which is what we were going back, like, why do we do this way, right? And the answer, as I said, oftentimes is you get these answers that make no sense, but the real answer is because we've done it for a long time. That's really the answer. And you have to have an incentive structure that aligns against that. So like, if I tell my team, like, we actually are willing to take measured risk, and then the project fails, not because like we were bad about analyzing the risk, but because look, like shit happens sometimes, right? And things don't work. We can't punish them for that. Like, that's not the right answer, right? The answer is, okay, like we tried and we learned from it, and hopefully but some of these things are probabilistic exercises.
Start with, if there's upside, you get the credit. If there's downside,
exactly, like, right. Which again,
it's my face that goes on Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and all these.
And actually, specifically, I told them that, which is like what a bunch of them told me. our job is to protect you basically from that kind of stuff. And I was like, no, that's not your job. I don't want you to protect me from that.
Right.
Like, look, I'll make the decision about whether I'm comfortable taking the risk or not. So it's about that. And then you're exactly right, which is it's about finding the people in the organization who are excited about the prospect of doing things differently, who have been waiting for somebody to come in and give them that permission, right? So I'll give you a very, very simple example. In the retirement services side, again, so like it takes us a very long time to process people's retirement. So there's a massive gap between when you stop getting your paycheck in the federal government and when you actually start getting your pension. And particularly in a year like last year where we had 300,000 people leaving government, most of whom retired, like the volumes that we were dealing with were like 2 to 3 times what they should have been. So we knew that was gonna be a problem. So we have this concept of called interim payment, basically, which is like, okay, when we get your application, for some applications, we do a quick calc and we're like, okay, we think we owe you $1,000 a month. Okay, I'm going to discount that by 20% to make sure I'm not totally wrong. And so I'm going to start paying you $800 a month until I get to the final piece, right? And so I was like, okay, well, why can't we expand that and do more? And they're like, well, again, started with it was statutory. I was like, no, it's not statutory. I've looked it up myself. And they're like, well, this is how we do it. And what if we're wrong and all this other stuff? And so like I actually sat down with them and I was like, okay, let's build a spreadsheet, which is like, how wrong can we be based upon our past data? What would it actually cost over what period of time? And this is a $1.2 trillion retirement fund next to the Social Security and Medicare funds. It's the next largest. It turned out the math was like, if we got 100% of the cases wrong, which historically we've gotten like 3% wrong. If we got 100% of the cases wrong and it took us 3 months to figure it out, the entire hit to this $1.2 trillion fund was something like, I don't even know, it was like $5 million or something. I was like, okay, guys, nobody wants to lose $5 million, but like $5 million of potential risk, which I know we're never going to get to, in order to get people a paycheck, like literally the day they retire instead of like 9 months from now, like that's well worth doing. And so it's sometimes like that, which is like, you just have to literally go down to the micro level and figure out like, what's the blocker? Because the blocker was this irrational fear of something happening, but the fear wasn't rational. The fear was totally irrational when you actually showed them the, like the process of doing it. So it's kind of stuff like that. And then, yes, it's also about, as we talked about, yes, there were people that I could find in the CIO organization who were like, yes, this is exciting. And like people would tell me, hey, you got to go talk to this person who normally, whatever, I might not talk to them because whatever, they're 5 levels down the organization. But I'm like, look, I want to hear from you.
They have these ideas. Yeah.
So it's about, I think that's what I learned is that kind of stuff. And again, like I think Ben is like the master at all this stuff is, like there are some things that you have to actually like walk people to the water on. Yeah. And obviously you can't do that on everything. And of course, at some point in time, if like managers can't actually do these things on their own at some point, that's a problem. But like, sometimes you have to actually micromanage in order to like change the nature of how things are working.
Like you're bringing the exact Silicon Valley, get down to the root of the problem philosophy to a 2 million people organization.
Yeah, I hate this. I hate this interview question people always used to use, which is like, describe your management style. Are you a micromanager or are you like not a micromanager? I was like, well, like, of course, like we all aspire not to be micromanagers, but that's not the right question. The question is like, when should you be a micromanager and when do you actually know that you have exhausted your ability for this individual to actually run their organization and therefore you've made a mistake and you got to go fire them and go hire somebody else, right? Like that's the real answer to the question, but of course nobody wants to say that. So,
and I would imagine if you're taking on a role like this, where you're unfamiliar with it, you would have to go down to the root of the problem and figure out how these things work. If you like keep floating 6-7 levels above, like it's hard for you to get a feel of what's going on.
Yeah, especially when like especially when you've got an organization that is so static and has been doing the same things forever. And by the way, all the senior leaders in the organization have been in those jobs for 20, 25 years. Yeah. And again, they've all grown up and lived in this environment where thou shalt take no risk. And like you'll never change anything that way. Right.
So when you go disrupt rank like that, how does that disrupt the organization?
Yeah, look, first of all, like I did it transparently. It's not like I was surreptitiously going around, but I was like, hey, look, like, and I told people every time I had an all hands and every time I sent an email community, I was like, literally send me an email with your ideas. And, not everybody does, but like I got a ton of emails. Yeah. I was like, look, like I don't believe in like, you don't need to like go through your manager to get to me, basically. Tell me your ideas. And yes, like some of those ideas are going to be stupid and that's fine. I don't really care about that. And some of them are not actionable, but so it's again, none of this was like, I was like secretly going, outside of managers. I told them, I'm like, look, I want to hear from you. I want to hear from other people. And then we're going to collectively, work these. What you don't want to do, right, which is you don't want to like go talk to somebody, whatever, 4 levels down, and then give them direction without, based on what they're saying, right? You want, obviously, look, you want to go back and say, great, and that's what I did. I would talk to my managers. I'm like, okay, here's what I heard when I talked to 10 different people in the organization. Does this make any sense to you? Are they all like hallucinating and smoking crack, or is the reality like, okay, yes, like there really is something here. So yeah, like what I'm not going to do is like reach down and give direction to people, because then you undermine the manager, and that's a terrible thing. And at that point in time, you may as well fire that person. Now, of course, in the federal government, as you know, it's almost impossible to fire that person.
Right.
So it's not really an option. But so like again, what I said is, look, I'm not going to like direct people to do stuff, but this is information gathering, and then I'm going to come talk to you about it. And yes, if I feel like you are not being truthful to me, or you're not willing to execute the things I need you to do, then yes, like that's a different conversation. So that's how I think you could do it in an effective way without undermining the managers who actually have to ultimately like deal with the chain of command and all the other things that go along in an organization.
On that note, like one of the things that makes operating startups different is you can fire when people are not performing.
It turns out you actually have at-will employees, right, in most things outside of the federal government.
So how are you thinking of reforming that in some way? Okay, like can you talk a little bit more about that?
Okay, so, and I've said this publicly, look, I think, so today, basically you have, as I mentioned, roughly 2 million civilian employees who are protected through civil service reforms. And then you have, I think the answer, I may get this wrong, roughly a third of that population is also members of unions, right? So you have kind of in that group, so you effectively have kind of 2 layers of protection.
Right.
Now, the origins of the civil service laws make total sense, which is literally if you go back to like the 1800s, every single job in government was a patronage job. It was like, okay, great, you're my buddy, I just won an election. Literally every single job, not just the politicals that we have today, people like me, but literally every job was. And so the Pendleton Act, they put it in place and they're like, this is bad, we shouldn't have patronage. But over time, what has happened is this whole series of civil service protections have also created a situation where it's virtually impossible to fire people. And if you do, there's a whole layer of protections that happen. And so as a result, what happens, and this is why, as I mentioned, only 0.3% of people get ranked a 1 or a 2, is because no manager wants to deal with that, because they're going to sit in depositions and it's going to take 24 months to do it. And so they just basically, quite frankly, just ignore the problem.
Right.
And in an environment where you've always been able to go back and just get more headcount is fine, because you're like, okay, I have people here who, quite frankly, everyone knows they can't do their job. They're not actually doing their job. I don't want to deal with it, but I'll just go ask for more headcount this year, and I'll basically cover up the problem that way. Right?
I've heard the story. Maybe you can respond to it or not, but I heard the story. I don't know who I was with, but they mentioned that in the government what happens is you stack low performers and you transfer them. You create a new, it's easier to create a new organization. You transfer them to a new organization, and then it's easier to dissolve that new organization than it is to actually.
So there are some very, very weird rules around reductions in force, right? RIFs and stuff like that. And so yes, that is hard. So yes, there are. People have figured out, let me put it this way. Right. People have figured out ways to try to deal with a system that in my mind like is in need of reform. So, okay, so what are we doing? So let me just get to like, what can we do? So obviously there's some things that require legislation. The honest answer, as you well know, is like, there's not much of a chance we're going to get legislation on most of this stuff, because we literally can't even pass a budget, right? So like, I'll just put that aside for the time being. But we have the power of, we can make regulatory changes, right? We can, put out a notice to say we're going to change this, and the public can comment on it. And so we're using that power for ourselves. So what can we do? So one is, as I mentioned, is we're mathematically limiting the number of people who can get 4s and 5s. So only 30% of the group now. So number one is we are forcing some element of stack ranking, right? We're not enforcing a like 1 and 2 thing, but we are really encouraging people to think about like, we've put some rules in place, which is, you must put a PIP in place if somebody's not performing, right? And a lot of people didn't do that. You have to like review the PIP after 30 days and like make a proactive determination that the person is working or not, right? So we're putting some obligations there. We are changing the rules around being able to, how difficult it is to get rid of people. So we've got a whole set of regulations to make reductions in force easier. And none of this, again, I don't want to be callous about this. Look, none of this is with the goal of getting rid of people, but it's with the goal of creating an accountable and high-performing organization, right?
Yeah, of course.
How appeals get done, we're reforming kind of that stuff. And then on the positive side, like we're trying to do other stuff on the positive side, which is we just put a note out on this the other day. For most jobs in government, there's something called time and grade, which means if I hire you today, you have to be in that job for at least 12 months before I can even consider promoting you. Well, in my mind, like, that's just bad. Like that's just bad management, right? And like we want high performers to go through the organization faster. So like we are proposing to repeal all those rules and say, look, if I hire you tomorrow and after 3 months you're like knocking the cover off the ball and you're like the best, the best person there, like I should promote you and I should give you more responsibility. So things like that. We're reforming all of the job descriptions to eliminate like college degree requirements or tenure requirements there, so that.
That is actually one of my favorite topics.
Yeah, it's a really cool stuff. So it's stuff like that. So and then look, what we can't do is.
So that's for the new recruitment coming in.
Yeah, like right, exactly. So like, the example of that one is, which I always, actually on your show, I can say it, right? The guy euphemistically known as Big Balls, who you've probably heard of, the Doge engineer, Edward Korstein is his name. So when I first got there, I saw this article about how, people were taking shots at him, of course. And like, there was a government official who was like, we never would have hired this guy because he didn't graduate from college and he doesn't have like 10 years of work experience. And so to me, I'm like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, right? Like, so I think he's like 19 years old. But if he can perform at the level of an amazing engineer, like, yes, we should hire him. Like, and we should hire him at like a very senior level, because if he's doing work that's commensurate with that level, we should do that. So so like we're eliminating all that stuff. And so that every job we can, we're going to take out. I don't care if you went to college or not. I don't care if you've been in a job for 10 years. The question to me is like, do you actually have the skills to do the job we want to do? And if a college degree is intended to be like predictive of something, then like tell me what that something is and let's interview for that skills. But just because, like if Big Balls turned out to have a Russian literature degree from, some university, and he's applying for a engineering job, like I don't think the Russian literature degree is that relevant to whether he can perform an engineering job, right?
Yeah. All right. I mean, I guess like if you interviewed me for an electrical engineering job, then we would be having a very different conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And the problem is, again, like historically what's happened is we've never actually given people assessments on these things. So like what used to happen if you were applying for this electrical engineering job is you would literally fill out a questionnaire and they would say, are you an expert in circuit design? And you might presumably check yes. Yeah. But we never actually gave you a test to see, like, do you actually know anything about like what circuits are and stuff like that, right? So now the goal is like, get rid of all these like stupid self-attestations and proxies, and let's actually give people where it's appropriate. Like not every job has a technical test, but certainly for a software engineer, like, yes, we should give you a code signal test or whatever, hacker rank, whatever these things are. We should give you a test and we can actually do a, determination of, do you actually know what you're talking about? Like that seems like a much more rational way to hire people.
How do you think, well, since you're already thinking about getting rid of credentials as like an evaluation criteria, how do you think about the future of as AI advances, as like the role of institutions? It's not going to go away overnight, but there is a role, and maybe it's more cultural, and maybe it's like more of the community aspect. But the training aspect is, do we go back to like this apprenticeship model? Do trade schools become the new credential that everybody looks for? How do you think
maybe
government organizations look at all these different
look, what I think about it, I was actually with a bunch of college presidents yesterday at a meeting, and I was like, look, I'm not, and I want to be totally clear, like as someone who, look, I went to Stanford, two of my kids went to Stanford, so like, look, I probably can talk out of both sides of my mouth on this topic, but the main point that I'm trying to make is I'm not like anti great university. What I want to do is like, I want to avoid credentialing as an excuse for actually figuring out what skills people have.
Right.
And so again, like one of my daughters was a computer science student, like, when she applied for that job, yes, like I'm sure the fact that she was at Stanford and they're like, okay, we think she's smart because she has a Stanford computer science degree. I get that. Yeah. But they also had her take a coding test, right? And I'm like, that's totally fair. And that makes total sense. So to me, it's not like a question of like, should universities go away? There's a lot of valid things that people learn at universities. The question is like, in the hiring process, are we relying on things that actually are, we pretend they're predictive of success, but they're not actually predictive of success. Now, the second part of that though, I do think is really important, which is, I do think you're right that there's a huge opportunity for us to think about, and we know this already. Look, not everybody for every job in the world needs to go to a 4-year, private university, right? And I think, look, we've seen this already. I think we've sold people down the river a lot on this stuff, where lots of people come out with these schools with enormous debt, and quite frankly, they end up doing jobs that like they can never get themselves out of debt. So I do think we have to rethink like the role of community college, the role of apprenticeships, the role of like trade schools. Because look, there's a huge, like people can make a great living doing these things. And like, why have we like told them the story that if what you really want to be able to do is be like a, electrician or run your own plumbing business, like why the hell are we telling those people to go to 4-year college? Like that just to me seems like a complete, like we're saddling them with things that they don't need to be saddled with.
Right. I think like the US education debt is almost the same size as the retirement budget you mentioned, which is,
I believe it. Yeah, it's huge.
So it's like somewhat over $1 trillion at least, right?
Yeah, it's huge. And again, so then what happens is then we do these stupid things. We're like, okay, every now and then we're like, let's forgive it or stuff like that.
Yeah.
What I'd rather do is like, okay, for example, if there are actual apprenticeship type things or community college things, like, great, like let's go build like, I don't know, what is like the minimum, what does a AI network engineer need to look like in the year 2030 or something? And let's go partner with a local community college and say, great, maybe the answer is there's a 2-year very practical training we can do. And maybe the role of government in that should be, maybe that's a good use of a student loan program, which is great. Like for something like that, like that's important. We should do that. And the government maybe should provide some loans for that. And maybe the answer is if you go back into an underserved community, then you get to forgive those loans or something. Like none of these things are, I think the problem with all this stuff politically is like, we go to like these all or nothing solutions. And I think these things are much more nuanced.
Yeah.
But yeah, like there is a role for community college, there's a role for trade schools. And like we should embrace that and recognize that lots of people can, make very good livings for themselves and their families if we actually didn't help them make them think that there was like only a single path that you go down.
Well, I know you're completely on this different side of the coast in like slightly different role, but what are people in venture ecosystem or startups, what can they help you with? Is it what's top of mind? Is it the tech transfer exchange program?
I would say the biggest things, for those of for your listeners here who are in the tech ecosystem, who are interested or at least have an interest in our country, look, the big things that I would love is like, we need talent, right? So and particularly we need like modern software development talent. We need data scientists. We need people like that. If we're going to modernize our systems, we need that. So number one is like this Tech Force program, that I think I mentioned to you, like it's a huge priority of ours.
Right.
2 is more generally, we need early career people in government. So just the demographics, 7% of our workforce in the federal government is under the age of 30. That compares with 22% in the entire US workforce. So by a factor of 3 to 1, we suck at getting early career people in. And by the way, close to half, 44% of our population is over the age of 50 in the federal government. So look, I obviously, I'm a small government guy, but like if we do nothing, like half of our workforce will retire in the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
And like 7%.
But then there's the other challenge. Then you probably have a filling up those roles problem.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Right. So like, that's the other thing that I just want more generally, if your audience skews younger, which I assume it does, like more generally, like think about, and again, my message is very clear. Like I'm not asking you to come commit 40 years of your life to the government. What I'm asking people to think about is like, could there be an opportunity for you to like work on some of the coolest, most challenging, interesting problems for 1 year, 2 years, do some service to the government, earn some skills, and then like go to the private sector? That's awesome. Look, I was a private sector guy my whole life, so I'm not like by any stretch, like it's not a normative statement. It's just that I think you can do both. And I think we've told a terrible story in the federal government, which is come here and stay here for life. And not only I just don't like no organization works that way anymore. And also I just think that's a terrible marketing proposition for the under 30 crowd. So like that's where, and then the third big thing I would just say for anybody broadly in the technology community is like, keep doing and developing the things you're doing. Like one of the things we're trying to do is to look at, how can we make the acquisition process more friendly towards early stage companies, like stuff like that. Like, so look, the government has had a long-standing reliance on big systems integrators and contractors. One of the other big objectives that we have as an administration is we really got to figure out like the things that there are a lot of things like that need to come back in house, where if we could, I'd much rather hire full-time employees than kind of, outsource everything to folks. And there's nothing wrong with outsourcing where it needs to be, but like we've over-outsourced.
Yeah.
We have contractors who are there on 5, 10 year, 20, literally 20-year contracts. Like to me, that makes no sense. Like, yes, we should have contractors for like skills areas that we can't recruit for and or temporary plus ups for things that are time limited, but instead we've gotten lazy about it. And so there's things like that. So the more that the tech industry can continue to build fantastic third-party tools, I think you have certainly in this administration, I think you have an awareness and a desire to incorporate more commercial technology into government instead of building these bespoke applications like, some of the 119 disparate HR IT systems we have that like don't serve people very well.
What are some of these problems that are these like specific HR related tools? What sort of problems are?
It's everything. It's everything from, certainly, I would say on the positive side, like Department of War has done a great job, right, in terms of, utilizing third-party commercial technologies to help with, drones or submarines, right? We're selfishly, we're investors in Saronic, right? As you may have seen, right? And it's amazing that Saronic was able to rescue these two downed pilots. That's really cool and exciting. So they've done a good job. I would say more generally across government, we've done a really bad job of whether it's, obviously HR solutions is one, financial solutions, just work, generally any kind of productivity solutions, we tend to be very, very poor at adopting those things. So what does the software stack look like in any Fortune 500 enterprise? The federal government does not look like that. And quite frankly, in many cases, it probably should. Right. So we could benefit from that.
All the entrepreneurs who are running those companies should think about, maybe, the government could also adopt.
Yes. Pitch your wares to the federal government. And yes, it's hard and it's painful and we made it, we haven't made it easy, but I think there is more of an awareness of these challenges and a desire to try to change that.
And you've talked about, let this be one of the last two questions is, because I think Rhythm Signal we've gone over. I'm so sorry. Did you have something after?
It's okay.
Okay, so you've talked about doing a tech transfer program in NASA where people can come do 2 or 3 years, go out, and then also people in NASA can go out and get private sector experience.
Yeah, so this is a huge thing we're doing, which again is a total missed opportunity for the government. So it's NASA Forces the program, and so NASA has an interesting problem, which is, they actually do a pretty good job of recruiting early career people. And then the problem is all the mid-career people want to go work for Elon.
They don't have a branding problem.
Bezos, right? No, they do not have a branding problem. Like the rest of the federal government does, which we're trying to change, but they don't have a branding problem.
Yeah.
So what we're doing with NASA is two things. One is exactly that. So we're going to a bunch of the private sector partners with NASA and say, look, where we really need your help to advance the things that we think are important. And oh, by the way, selfishly for you, Mr. and Mrs. Private Company, will help you with your objectives is we need more mid-tier management inside of NASA to accomplish this stuff. So we're working with these companies to basically say, hey, second people for a year or two, send us your senior managers or your directors and view it as a career opportunity for them to kind of, learn in a new environment, see some cool stuff. We'll put them, we have to manage conflicts, right? Of course, it's always an issue. So we'll put them in some area that's not directly competitive with, what all your competitors are doing with and stuff like that. But number one is help us advance the mission of NASA by filling a bit of a talent challenge that we have. And then the other thing that we want to do more of, which NASA is excited about, is take some of those early career NASA people and put them for a 6-month or 12-month stint into these private companies. And maybe you scratch their itch a little bit so that, they don't all depart and go work for Elon, but they're willing to work for Elon for a year and then come back and then take those skills back to government. So it just more generally, and more generally, this is a thing we're trying to do, which is we've got to have more public-private exchange, right? Everybody's worried about ethics. And again, it's not that the ethics issues aren't real, but again, this is another risk-reward thing, which is, okay, there's going to be some bad actors. There are going to be some people who are going to take advantage of the system. On balance, I think the upside is so much greater if people had some exposure and experience in other stuff. So we have, and I know we're almost out of time here, but I'll give you an example. In the federal government, the highest ranking people in the management structure are called SES, Senior Executive Service. It's basically the equivalent of being whatever, a general manager at a private company or something. 90-something% of them have been in the federal government for more than 25 years or something. And there's nothing wrong, by the way. I'm not saying being in federal government is bad, but the vast majority of those have never had any experience outside the federal government. And so just for diversity of experience of seeing what it's like to be in a private company or managing a P&L in a different way, those are things that I think could massively benefit the government if we did more of these kind of public-private exchanges.
That is a really exciting opportunity.
Yes.
I think both for workers within the government, and I think now I understand what the pitch is to the younger talent that's coming in. You're okay, come in for 2 years, but then we have these industry partnerships.
Yes.
And you have some sort of track or path towards these really interesting companies that will, be great for your career.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Look, I think we owe it to the early career talent. The pitch can't just be it is your obligation. It is your obligation to work for the government, right? This is not. We are not. We do not have
I don't think that works well with Zoomers.
No. The pitch needs to be, first of all, come work on super cool, interesting problems, which I really believe is true at a scale and a complexity you can't get elsewhere. And then the pitch has to be, in doing so, you generate skills that are highly attractive to the private sector. And so if you want to go to the private sector, that's awesome. Yeah. And we will help you, by the way. And so part of Tech Force, by the way, as you know, is we've got 40 private sector companies who have agreed they're going to run a job fair at the end of this 2-year program. And of course, they can't promise me they're going to hire you because they don't know who the hell you are today. But if you do good work, if 100% of those people want to go to the private sector, I want 100% of those people to get a job in the private sector. And that would be awesome.
I mean,
that'd be great.
It didn't even exist before, right? So now you have all these 40 companies and the relationship starts there, and these things have a way of evolving themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
So final question would be, or what is a book outside your own that has completely transformed your thinking on how you operate? It could be life, philosophy, business, and
yeah. I have spent a long time as a student of happiness, basically, right? Of reading as much literature as I can out there, and I've read all these books, and there's all kinds of stuff. And actually, Marc and I used to a long time ago trade emails on this, and look, my going in assumption as a classic type A person was, okay, like I will achieve happiness when I get to this level in my career or this level in terms of financial success otherwise. And look, what we all know, of course, now today, and which I should have known, is like that's just complete BS, basically, right? Like what happens, of course, is we all like reset our expectations every time we hit somewhere, and you get on the hedonic treadmill and it never works. So so the most influential thing to me has been just a series of reading and trying to do that stuff and doing a crappy job in many cases in my own life, but trying to reform myself to think about, okay, like how do you truly like achieve satisfaction? And now, like I'm at a stage of my life where I get to do some of those things. I teach at the Stanford GSB, which is like stuff like that to me like is a lot of fun. I've stopped looking for satisfaction from like something that happens at work as opposed to something that happens outside of work. I try to do a better job of like investing in experiences and relationships and less of a job in investing in, kind of like what my, kind of daughters call my like, work friends basically and stuff like that who aren't really friends. So that's probably been the most influential thing for me. And I, as I said, like I suck at it many days and I still revert back to my old bad habits, but I try to constantly remind myself that like, if you're looking for satisfaction or happiness in certain areas, like the honest answer is you're almost never likely to find it there. And you've got to actually take a step back and figure out like what actually is the derivation of these things. So it's been a kind of a lifelong journey that will probably still be lifelong for as long as I'm here on this earth. But
well, nobody's given that message on the pod before.
Really? So okay. Well, that's good. Okay.
We'll let that be the closing message. Scott Kupor, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking out the time.
Thank you for having me.